Gray drizzle slicks the palace stairs and strings every drip into a patience test. The rushes underfoot are tacky with old wine and yesterday's bravado. Ushers test their shush the way coopers test hoops. Tap here, squeeze there, pretend it isn't mostly show. The throne sits on its dais like a promise somebody sharpened. The rail between dais and petitioners has a kink where tempers tried to live last quarter. You're the newest chamber warden on whisper watch, stake bag at your hip, a coil of woolen hush cord in your fist, tally slate and penknife under your arm, a bag of pounce that smells like crushed shells, a pot of red ochre that will make friends or enemies depending on your wrist. If you like watching a room learn to behave without anyone needing to roar, walk with me. Tap subscribe and ring the bell. We'll peg the listening lane, flip the hour of air, and make quiet do the work. Orders are plain because their consequences aren't. Peg a cord from throne rail to petitioner's mark. Hang the board. Hear first, answer after. Where cloaks will brush it no matter their cloth. Check the roll of matters. Post the ban, no knives near parchment. A page mutters for bravery, kings die loudly. The steward doesn't smile. He sets his tally like a reed pin and points it at the king's brother. Back from hunt, softer than a cat. Eyes that add sums and call them accidents. It's the quiet ones that move armies, he says. Make the line mean it. You kneel and chalk the first stroke across the rushes. Peg taps, tap tap, turn, tap. The hush cord snakes under your palm, as if it means to be mischief unless trained. You give it a new story. Straight from dais rail to the mark, shallow arc where the bench lane kinks, seam to the board where ink has jurisdiction. Cord too near and pride cheats. Men lean and turn the king's time into their own. Cord too far and courage spills into noise. The hearing becomes theater. Either way, the rule must be up before the hush horn peals speak. Rail. The sergeant palms a peg and rams it home with the tenderness only people who have carried steel long enough to fear it possess. You plumb the dais rail, post to post, eye to chalk line, until the bend reads like intention instead of collapse. You stamp footing from door to board so the first boot doesn't slip into an apology, then draw 2 chalk rings, one at 2 paces from the rail for mouths that think volume equals weight, one tight to the rail for hands that need somewhere to stop. A fan tips and feathers spit into the seam. You catch the handle with 2 fingers and return it with a face that says more than a paragraph would. The linen-cuffed owner reads your cheekbone and learns without making you teach. You hang the board where sleeves must rub it. Hear first, answer after in red ochre, thick enough to embarrass any man pretending he can't read. Lower down, the small law hand, seam talk, mint then vinegar. False start, vinegar coin. No knives near parchment. You set your bag of mint on the rail like a forgiveness that only arrives once. Hidden worlds ride under your bracers. Last winter's barred provocations list. No name-calling that requires a sword to answer. No goat stories with known targets. No laughing at stammers or foreign names. A spare bag of mint for dry mouths that will otherwise hire their own trouble. Hand signs, 2 fingers down, step, flat palm, hold, fist low, down. Pocket drill for a spine about to disgrace a mouth, set feet, breathe, count. The steward's eye moves from the brother to your cord hand and stays there long enough to give your knuckles manners. You ease the arc at the rail a thumb where the rushes are slick with secrets. He notices. He doesn't nod. This is permission. The hush horn peals its low request. Names, the usher says in a voice made of pounce and patience. The caller reads from the pounced roll, Old Mill, Water Rights, Widow Sigrid, Roof Grant, Captain Joran, Levy Exemption. The page with the clean cuffs starts to smirk on Joran's name. Your palm hovers like weather. Down. He obeys. You chalk a quiet seam from door to board. Ochre dots 2 boot widths wide where story must stop and grammar begin. Men read with their souls sooner than with their eyes. You knot the first peg with red thread, firm here. A lord with a trout mouth watches you, then watches the brother, then decides to be reversible ink until further notice. A quill spits, ink flecks the roll. You dust it with pounce and move on. Staff raps once, measure kept. First petitioner sets toe on the outer ring. He tries to shout 2 words early. You lift a mint sprig toward his mouth without looking at his face. He takes it because it is easier to chew than to argue. He counts his breath like coins. 1, 2, 3. By 4, his story has become a sentence. By 5, his shoulders have adopted the chord's curve. By 6, the brother is still and the king is listening. You log on the sanded slate without theater. Stood first, old mill, seam talk, 0 vinegar, 0 guard change, none. The steward's stylus whispers totals without looking at you, as if numbers do the only flattering anyone deserves before lunch. A murmur opens near the rail where the brothers' men have learned to keep their boots clean. This will be quick, one says to another. You mark a small chalk claw beside their toes and a larger ring around their lips. They see it, their mouths become weather vanes, turning to the draft, not to the board. A provocation lifts a feather a few rows back. A fan shaft quivers, the rushes whisper. Somebody who came for noise discovers there isn't a market for it this morning. The brother folds his glove like a man who has rehearsed being harmless. The cord between you and him hums without being tugged. The page who muttered kings die loudly sidles to the seam when he thinks you, recounting heads, and asks, "Doesn't a loud throat prove a strong case?" You point to the chalk at his feet and the grain of the board. "Count," you whisper. He frowns, he counts. He doesn't like what arithmetic does to certainty. Few people do. 2 benches try to trade places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer. Half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume is currency. The chord stays true. The tide of matters keeps pretending it planned this. A quill point nicks your finger when you forget yourself on a knot in the grain. Blood beads. You put your hand behind your back and suck the sting. No knives near parchment is not only a ban, it is a reminder that skin is not a seal. The steward leans and says nothing, the way men do when they know the room is learning the lesson without a speech. He has watched brothers softer than cats become crowns. He has watched chords keep peace where steel costs too much. He will not say any of this aloud. His staff will rap twice when the measure is kept. That is what sticks. If it were your hall, if a page said, "Kings die loudly," and a brother smiled like a cat, how close would you set the hush chord at first light? Nearer for bite or wider for safety? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I read them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush horn asks whether the chord belongs on the rushes again. You pace the quiet seam once more. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The chord holds without being pulled. The board says here first, answer after in letters cuffs cannot ignore. The brothers' men have learned which part of the floor belongs to numbers. The horn will say speak in a breath. You breathe. You let someone else move their mouth where the line told them to. The tiny decisions, one thumb on an arc, one mint leaf at a time, make a court that doesn't need thunder to be afraid. And that here is the only kind of safety you can afford. Dew settles on the rushes and decides the hall is its kingdom. The hush chord is cold in your palm. Pegs knock a little tune your wrist knows by heart. Routine is the law that lets courage stay civil. Before sun, peg the lane. Tap, tap, turn, tap. Run the chord true. No swales for pride to pool in. No proud humps for stories to trip over. Pounce the daybook. Ground shell sifted soft across the first leaf so ink will bite where truth must stick. Chalk 2 rings by the dais rail. 1 at 2 paces for mouths that think volume is weight. 1 tight to the rail for hands that need a place to stop. At the horn, petitioner speaks. Answer waits. Hush. At the mark read, post order, paste to sureties. How many boots stand behind each breath and how much barley behind each promise? At lull, swap frayed hush straps for waxed. Saturday slack is dead. Dry strap first keeps hands from blaming weather for their tremble, and string a laundry rope between uprights to air the cloaks. You draft the rota in neat chalk along the board, hush staffs to seams, 1 per, name runners to corners fetch next before anger learns its lines. Reserves to the rear bench to widen on order. They will pretend boredom now and be grateful when boredom becomes space. Your job sits on your knuckles. Set the speaking sequence. Tie colored threads on staves where a glance will do the work of a speech. White for petition, blue for oath answer, yellow for water pause. Your ledger opens and learns 4 verbs again. Pegged, heard, hushed, set by. The usher's stylus whispers them into wax as if numbers are talismans. Peg taps. Chord hum. Sandglass hisses as barley falls. The horn peals its low speak, breath before words, the note that gives order a spine. The bell for answer waits like a polite gavel. The day pretends it is learned. It isn't. Provost arrives with a small book that wants to be a conscience and boots that prefer tile to rush. Inspection, he says, rehearsed, eyes on the chord as if the word makes lines true. Let him through and you stir, gossip. They're cooking the order. Bar him and he leaves with the same sentence, salted to taste. Either way, the tide of cases won't wait. You scrape a peg tip across the seam, threshold only, and hand him your fine slate. Posted, read, mint first, vinegar next, you say. He leans, finds dew and chalk and no theater, and becomes furniture without suing for a roll. Some morning always tips an ink pot. Today it chooses your fines book. You jam your wrist under the flood and save the line that counts. Seam talk equal to mint, then coin. False start equal to vinegar coin. Elbow across chord equal to seat lost. 3 strokes drown. Your head writes them back, while your hand blots and your mouth moves 2 benches with finger signs. Step, hold, down. So the chord stays an idea instead of a rope. 2 benches swap places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer, half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume counts as measure. The chord remains true. The hush keeps pretending it planned this. The steward's staff raps once for measure kept and twice when a laugh tries to become a rule. Caller, old mill, water rights, white thread on the stave. The miller steps to the chalk ring and finally owns his boots. You hold your palm, hold, and point to the glass. He counts barley instead of goats. He survives his own mouth. You notch herd one and paste to sureties. Boots for old mill, Ethel in person, 2 sacks barley otherwise. Bell taps, blue thread, oath answer. The respondent tries to slide closer to the dais while still speak waiting. You tow his shoes back across the seam and chalk a ring under his toes. Gravity has opinions. Set feet. Breathe. Count, you lend him the pocket drill. He obeys. He wakes into his sentence instead of stumbling into it. Yellow thread. Water pause. 2 lords learn that raising a hand at 2 is better than clearing a throat at 5. A hush staff crosses the seam with a cup and does not narrate his kindness. The usher marks the interruption. The steward marks the boots behind each sip. Water persuades better than oaths. Oaths remind water it's being watched. Wax blocks thud as straps get rubbed sensible. Dry strap first. You hear from 3 benches you weren't near. A good rule travels without you. Corruption arrives in its old coat. A porter offers extra heads closer seats to a lord whose mouth has always thought proximity equals dignity. Your look performs subtraction on his fingers. He learns to count to none. A cousin waves a folded open by order for nearer chord. The seal smells like pocket. You flatten it with your palm until paper remembers it is furniture, not command. The second, secret slate in your coat burns like a small coal. 3 lords who never take yellow water turns. You erase one name because last night he took yellow without making you hunt him. The other 2 you carry into tomorrow like a thorn you intend to pluck when you've earned the grip. Speak, the horn says again. The page with linen cuffs too clean sips his mint like a treaty and discovers he can wait for a bell without dying. The king's brother stands near the rail and learns the geometry of deference. 1 thumb behind the line. You do not look at him. You look at the peg nearest his boot and the chalk at his heel. He reads the lesson. At the mark read you post order where elbows must see it to sit. Order of speakers. 1 Old Mill, 2 Widow Sigrid, 3 Captain Joran. Answer 4 Lord Alcroft, water. Sureties posted Ethel boots in person barley 2 sacks. The board forgives the crowd its mourning and the crowd forgives the board its handwriting. People trust chalk more than they admit. The page tries a whisper in the seam while still waiting his turn. You lift the mint and then the sprig of lavender. He swallows pride before vinegar has to buy its seat. A fan somewhere shifts too loud. A staff raps once and the air remembers. Measure kept. The steward sends name runners to corners, like blood to fingertips. Widow Sigrid, they announce, not loud, just first. Boots find chalk. Words arrange themselves because the room has been taught they belong to a sequence, not a contest. If the provost wanted inside the cord to quiet rumor, would you let him inside inspection or keep him threshold only? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By mid-morning, the routine has trained the room. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The cord hums with attention, not appetite. The horn peals speak, the bell taps answer. The board says hear first, answer after in letters, cuffs can't ignore. You scrawl your 4 verbs one last time, pegged, heard, hushed, set by, and look down the quiet seam you chalked at first light. Men carry their breath to the rail like it was a thing they were proud of not spilling. The brother studies the cord and decides not to tug it. The hall decides to behave. Frost kisses the rail. Thaw wakes under the rushes. Ink in the horn goes sulky and sits until you warm it with your palm. You roll wax between finger and thumb for a hush strap that's stiffened overnight. You nick a clogged quill for the tally until the nib sighs into duty. Then you put your heel into yesterday's seam. It lies politely, top firm, under soft. The hall intends to be both treacherous and reasonable. At the gate, a market man rents his throat to a canard. Captain's up first, father's last, and fined. He tries it 3 ways to see which buys him nods. The warden doesn't answer. He sets his palm on the hush cord so quiet looks nailed down. Warden's peace at the cordon, he says. Then to you, orders that make your wrists honest. Demonstration without spectacle. Move the cord in the open. First plea at the novice rail. Chalk the board, firm here, danger there. No knives near parchment where boots must see it. From the chapel door the sacrist adds what your shoulders already know. No clatter, mass. Your morning becomes a shuttle of small courtesies. Hush cord, dais, fines table, back and forth until the rushes decide they are being watched. You cradle a roll of sealed writs under canvas so they don't look like invitations. You peg where the frost stayed loyal, ease where the thaw began to lie, stamp the seam yourself so the first boot won't be surprised. You pull the cord out in a shallow arc and pin it straight while everyone looks. Geometry calms men faster than speeches. Then the choice that buys you critics either way. Post the cord shift first, clean, visible arithmetic, and townsmen cry favoritism. See, captains get firm straw by the dais, fathers get slick rush by the door. Post the rotation list first, needier, fair, and the chamberlain fumes. You're teaching people their place matters more than their form. Meanwhile, if a passerby spies blue thread oath staves near the dais, he'll shout cheat instead of rule. You choose the sequence you can defend without a paragraph. Path first, promise second. Cord moved in the open, peg taps, cord hums, chalk rings down the lane. Rotation posted immediately after, white petition to near seam 2, blue oath answer to seam 3, yellow water pause last. Above it you chalk the bands where boots must see them to pass, no knives near parchment. A clerk from the captain's table arrives with a rota torn down the spine by a thumb that wanted to be a palm. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under his cuff against 6 rules and a superstition. You hold a corner while he stitches the day back together. The iron thinks about performing. The sacrist glances over and murmurs no clatter, and the iron learns to whisper. The hush horn peals its low speak. Peg taps quiet themselves. The warden keeps his hand on the rope but does not pull. He lends it patience, not weight. You chalk the public board by the door, firm here, danger there in a hand that refuses drama. Beneath, 2 columns the council learned last tide to count. Matters heard 1 strays arrested words over the line. 1. You hang a sprig of rosemary on a nail to keep hands sweet and you mean it. A herald's trumpet nicks the rising talk into pieces too small to hire. The cellarer hisses move at a knot of shoulders that thought they were a conversation. A boy in the outer ring sags at the hush, breath getting ahead of courage. You steady his elbow with your sleeve and tap his shoulder twice. Set feet. Breathe. Count, you lend him the pocket drill in a seam meant for quiet, not heroics. He nods at the chalk ring 2 paces back and forgives his own throat. You set the cinnamon brown pounce to the roll. Powder eats grease, ink bites truth. Warden's peace at the cordon. the usher repeats as he calls the first name at the novice rail. The petitioner steps to the ring and finally owns his boots. He lifts his chin, you lift your palm, hold, and point to the sand glass. He counts barley instead of goats. He survives his own mouth. Blue thread oath staves wait under canvas like temptation. You lay them last in daylight, far enough from the dais that nobody can pretend arrangement is favoritism. A passerby opens his mouth for cheat. Rule, you say without moving your teeth, and the arithmetic supports you. A priest catches chalk sigils blooming on the rail and says, "No charms, device, not charm, you note in your book and wipe them off with rosemary water." A friendly apothecary shuffles by selling a sentence as he dusts sand from his sleeves. Peas and felt save bowels, mint saves mouths, a 7 count saves throat. He is right often enough to be tolerated. 2 benches try to trade places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer. Half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume counts as measure. The cord remains true. The tide of matters keeps pretending it planned this. You post sureties for good order beneath the rota where elbows must see them to sit. Boots, Sigrid, in person, barley, 2 sacks, Joran. The brothers' men read the chalk and decide to borrow silence until later. The steward's staff raps once, measure kept. A fan somewhere shifts too loud, the staff raps again, the fan learns. Ink softens under your hand. The board collects its ticks. The cord stays where eyes watched you move it. The novice rail receives first plea in plain view. The bands hang where boots must see them. The market man runs out of buyers. If it were your hour, if the warden ordered demonstration without spectacle, what posts first, cord first or rotation first? Put it where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By mid-morning the proof looks like furniture. Cord where everyone saw it go. Novice rail first. Blue staves hung last and honest. The board says firm here, danger there, and nobody pretends not to read. The horn peals speak, the bell taps answer. Men carry their breath to the rail like it was a thing they were proud of not spilling. The hall decides to behave. Torches gutter and make the hall look smaller than it did at noon. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that ends the day whether anyone agrees. Word keeps its own hours and hires a chorus as it slips past the cord. Blind orders, favored cord. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it was cheated of a nearer rail. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do what halls are for. Turn mockery into policy. The beadle taps your plank twice with the stick that believes it writes law. Copy fair, copy fast, flawless. You square the sheet. The quill behaves because your hand has learned not to consult your feelings. Public notice. Quiet passage to and from the cord. You write it where boots must read before mouths can improvise. Alms fines for broken pegs and barred boasts. Novice rail dressed first. On paper, orders to post days range, wind, and water pause at dawn so rumor wakes up unemployed. You leave small doors the city needs to breathe. Save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Sand hisses. The line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare blooms in the shed. Orange climbs faster than sense. You and 2 pages are already moving. Buckets find your hands as if they were born there. Wet wool hisses on embered planks. The queue at the outer bar forgets its lyrics long enough to watch flame learn manners. Rosemary and vinegar go back to their quieter work of smelling like discipline. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle in your margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. Keep this quiet, the neat hand says. You tuck it under the ledger and rest your palm until paper remembers filing is a kind of death. Omit it forever, your bone tells your nerve. Your nerve sits. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The miller's sister stands with shoulders like broom handles and a voice built to carry 5 words. Leave the seat alone. Not loud. Truer than the jeer outside. You point your pen at the clause that teaches exceptions not to breed and write what the hall needed to learn. Seed spared in frost and foul wind. Distraint only on clear, novice seed cases first. The beetle coughs at the line that will cost him a friend. You keep the curve of the S steady, as if dignity could be written into vowels. Under the guest stair, a trap yawns. Men step down with private purses and come up with lighter pockets and better stories. Extra pegs, extra places. A porter has discovered he likes counting with his palm. You lift the hatch with a peg just enough to count and close it on a promise your shoulder can pay for in the morning. 2 more pegs gone than posted. 2 fewer tokens returned than sworn. The cellarer's hand lands on your shoulder with the weight of a nail. Make it wood, his thumb says. You nod. Boards can learn policy. You carry the fresh notice to the bar. Key rings stacked like teeth on the bailiff's belt chatter when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance, and then purrs after somebody shames it with grease. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the board gives the words a spine. Suspense settles behind you like a gull. If the jeers aren't answered, the outer bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name slides onto the slate the clerk keeps oiled, to be silenced. Either way, the tide of cases won't wait. Tomorrow's dawn needs a script more than you need applause. Inside, tallies of peg amercements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into the docket, some firm, some sideways, some made by hands that prefer tools to quills. Rosemary and vinegar steam lift the room's patience a half-inch. The astrologer drifts in, declares the hour lucky if men stop talking, then shoves the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken. Nobody pays him. He pretends the sky did. A patron's runner offers a folded chit with wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, it claims, chin high at your margin. You lay it under the same palm that smothered the beetle's slip and let paper learn to die politely. Now the contested name. It warms your pocket like a small stove. A lord whose cousin stands too often under the arch with the chamberlain expects the close-cord rota as if it were inheritance. He doesn't belong there. Another name does, the miller's sister whose coin bought seed a sunrise, the journeyman whose 7 count steadied 3 rails. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the city has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The city will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. Wet wool keeps hissing on the shed floor. The sister's coin keeps ringing dull in your pocket. The beetle keeps coughing at the worst line. The astrologer keeps shoving the lucky hour along as clouds thicken. You keep copying. Quiet passage, alms finds, novice rail first, range, wind, water pause at dawn. By the stair, the cellaret has a mouth for paid erasures. You walk past it and count aloud to your slate. Extra pegs, extra places. The cellarer's thumb presses your shoulder like a promise with hardware. Make it wood, you nod. Morning will learn carpentry. You read the notice aloud because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage, fines for broken pegs and barred boasts. Novice rail dressed first, ranges, wind, seed spared, water pause at dawn. The cartwheel squeals once more and then concedes to grease. Vinegar coins clink in ladles, key rings chatter like teeth. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand still dried, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket insisted on warmth it hadn't earned, what would you write, omit, or obey? Put it and where you're watching from below. I count them when the pounce dust washes from my fingers and the hush chord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. You knot the notice where the drum can keep it company. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does what it's told. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where Rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier, torches gutter, gates bar. The hall smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. Outside, a city is learning quiet rules by cord and chalk instead of knives and shouting. That is the price of quiet on paper, and the tide will keep the bargain. Dawn unlatches the palace wing. Trumpets wet their lips. Drums remember yesterday's beat and lend it to a town that hasn't earned music yet. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the buttery bar and nails the hour to the cord. His Grace commends those who kept quiet order at the cordon board. Ranges are chalked because a bargain in ink said they must. Windows stand open not from virtue but because a rule learned how to turn air into policy. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the order allowed it, not because anyone needs to admire it. The market man with the myth strides free as air, trying a new sentence on the light and deciding to save it for a paying crowd. A midwife's lintel wears a yellow tag instead of red. Someone wrote the exception and someone else obeyed it. Near the steps, a widow folds to the cobbles. Two strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her as if the town had rehearsed it, which it has. The velvet voice finishes the page. People accept being commended because it costs them nothing at this hour. Your errands carry edges. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the sheriff, quiet passage to and from the cord, alms fines for broken pegs and barred boasts, novice rail dressed first, day's range, wind, and water pause to be posted at dawn. He signs with a letter that doesn't blush and gives you the small look you've been earning all week. I saw. Second to the captain, the dry rota, the seam stitched by the clerk's little iron, the tally, matters heard. Strays arrested. Arithmetic she prefers to adjectives. She nods and spares you both a speech. Third to the guild, hung where money pretends to learn manners. A snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, a muster sheet for the king's levy is pinned, wide as appetite. Names bud at the lower edge where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally understand what the brothers' quiet plan bought. By failing where the cord held. Not glamour, but obedience. Not luxury, but lanes that move. Bellies steady, roofs that don't leak. And a harvest of men promised for later, because a straight cord is useful to more than courts. The dry rota hangs over the board, close cord, far cord, dry strap first, with the calm you wished for last week. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest, chests of fines grown into carts and purr after somebody shames the wheels with grease. A parchment-marked misadventure for a slip at wet flags goes into the docket, a lie with a warm heart that keeps the morning cheap. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash, the priest who warned off chalk charms watches it die and decides to respect devices publicly for a week. Then your coat remembers it has a drawer, the secret slate of spared turns, 3 men you didn't bring to the rail because 7 breaths were not enough to keep blood from learning old songs, the side list of moves you allowed against orders in the dark hour when thaw lied under frost and sense outranked command. Leak, burn, or file. You hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and brief. You would be too. It would splash in the yard like a good sin and die when nobody could afford to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing but how to run colder. File is the story this corner survives by. Proof where questions with hats can find it. Nowhere near mouths with errands. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger and listen for the click that promises a better hour will be allowed to ask you why. File. The steward finds you the way enamel always does. He offers a badge to mark more wisely, as if clarity were a party trick you refuse to perform. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, the sort of dangerous kindness that fits under a cloak. The sheriff passes and gives you what he does best in your direction, not nothing, not much. I saw. You answer all 3 with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier, silence. Here, your wrists say. You keep your post. Public reading by the bar begins again, because velvet likes 3s. The drum puts a spine under the notice. The captain's clerk flits in to finger the knot on the rota, decides it will hold, and vanishes before the market man can hire his breath. The sacrist rubs his palm along the chapel door and decides the wood can keep quiet without supervision. The cellarer hisses move at a shadow out of habit. A runner from the alderman tries you with a new chit. Open by order, the wax whispers in a humbler tone than yesterday's. You rest it under your palm and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to remind yourself who deserves your braver voice later, the widow whose seed you spared, and the guard whose 7 count steadied 3 rails. Rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. If you had to choose, soft under a patron's livery or hard under sanctuary eaves, what keeps you whole, livery or sanctuary? Put it in where you're watching from below. I count them after the pounce dust leaves my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By noon, the extracts have turned into furniture. People lean on them and forget the time when paper had to prove itself. The levee clerk learns to keep his line moving without explaining his face. The market man tests a fresh myth and discovers grief has better ears than appetite. The board holds. The cord stays true. The line breathes without you needing to give it a mouth. Justice this week was airflow and cord budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was choreography of chalk, pegs, glass, and staves, performed by people who don't need to be sung about to do it again. You were the hinge. You coil the slack. You pocket the keys. You bank the brazier. The horn will say speak, the bell will say answer, and the cord will mean listen. The tide will keep its bargain if you keep yours.